Morning, guys. Welcome to Wednesday Devotion. Hope you're going to have a fantastic day. Want to just continue today. We're continuing to talk on the subject of what it means to deal with the issue of fear. Fear that lurks at our door, wants to control us, and Satan knows that if he can make you fearful, he can control you. So we better do a good job on this one. It's a huge mountain. I said on day one, I think this is probably the biggest mountain that we have to deal with. And the more I talk about it, the more I realize that this is true. Yesterday, we did a comparison between King Saul and young David in the issue of fear of failure. We saw King Saul cowering and miserable and carrying with him that spirit of fear of failure all through his life, compared to David, who said, let me just have a go at this giant. I've got nothing to lose. I'll trust God and see what the result is. And there was no fear and there's no spirit of fear in his heart. I want to take it a step further today to talk about the fear of the future. Once again, I want to use King Saul and young David as an example. King Saul was not just fearful of failure, but he had this dread for the future. You could see that in his nervousness of what he was going to do when he went into battle. Could he win? Could he call upon God? Could his army beat the other army? But one day it came to a head, and we see in 1 Samuel 28, where he had to go to war against the Philistines, and the fear of failure and the fear of future combined together and caused him to go to the witch of Endor and call up the spirit of Samuel. Now, this is the only incident in the Bible where God has ever allowed a positive spirit to come back and to speak. So anything other than that is not what you think it might be. But the spirit of Samuel said, why have you called me back, Saul? You're so in fear, you're so riddled with the fear of the future and the fear of failure. Why are you not trusting God for this? And that was the end thing. That was the last straw, and that broke the camel's back with regard to God and God's relationship, and King Saul's relationship with God. God said, if you can't trust me for the future, then what can you trust me for? As opposed to young David, who was being chased by Saul through the wilderness, and in 1 Samuel 26, he knows he's going to be the king. He's been anointed to be the king. One day King Saul is having a nap down in his tent. David comes down from the mountain with his general, and he comes out of hiding and he walks into the tent. The king is asleep. The general says to him, hey David, now is your time. For this such a time as this king is asleep in front of you. Take that sword and run him through and kill the guy, and it will make you king. This is a shortcut to kingship, David. Do it. And David said, I will not touch God's anointed, and I'd rather do things in God's time. Now, when we want to take the future into our own hands, generally it gets us into trouble. And so we learn a beautiful lesson from David here today to say, trust God for your future. That beautiful thing in his time. He makes all things beautiful in his time. And in Proverbs we read there's a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to build, a time to break, a time to love and a time to hate. There's a time for everything under heaven. So when it comes to your future, people, maybe you need to look into your life and say, is there a time? Maybe there are people out there looking for a job in God's time. If you're faithful and continue to love and serve Him, in His time He'll find you something. Maybe there's young people out there saying, is anybody going to marry me? Will I get married one day? Trust God for that. Don't force it. Don't push it. Don't go looking and just, don't just trust God for the future and watch what He will do. The strangest thing happens is that I've spoken to so many people who say, Trevor, when I get to that point where I just put it down and I just release it to God, all of a sudden God says, okay, now I can do something. When you let go of controlling your future and wanting to do it yourself because you're desperate, generally it ends you up in trouble. But also when you lay it down and say to God, I'm going to trust you for my future. I'm going to trust you for the big things that you know my heart's desire. Watch what happens. God says, at last, your hands are off the situation. Now maybe I can do something for you. We've got to trust God for our futures. Now, this little lesson from King David here today is just an awesome one. In his time, he will make me the king. Trust God, people, in his time. The T's and C's of this are that you continue to be faithful to Him. You continue just to love Him, because He's not going to do anything good for you while you're trying to control it, while you're angry and you're bitter and you're upset and you're anxious. God can't do much while your hands are all over this thing. Take your hands off. Chill. Relax for a bit. And say to God, God, I'm going to trust you for my future. And I'm going to love you in the meanwhile until you do what you want to do. There's a beautiful old song that we used to sing, or it's actually a cliche that we used to say, I know not what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. Now that's a cliche, but you know why it's a cliche? Because it's true. I hear people use this all the time. They yeah, it's just a cliche. But the reason it's a cliche is because it's the absolute truth. I don't know what the future holds, but man, I know who holds my future. Whatever it may be, folks, let go of trying to control your future. Allow God to do what only God can do, and watch what happens. Go and have an awesome day.